The fluorescent lights of Megamart buzzed overhead, making everything look washed out and slightly unreal. I'd passed this place 100 times without giving it a second thought. Now I stood in the nearly empty parking lot at 9:45 in the evening, clutching my resume in a folder that had seen better days. 3 weeks without a paycheck had a way of changing your standards. 27 unanswered applications and 4 interviews that went nowhere. I'd started keeping track in a spreadsheet that only made the situation more depressing each time I updated it. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh of climate-controlled air. The greeter's station stood empty this late. A few customers lingered in the vastness of the store, their shopping carts echoing against the polished floors. I followed the signs to customer service, where a woman with graying hair pointed me toward the back offices. "You the night shift interview?" she asked, barely looking up from her register. "Yes, ma'am." "Robert's waiting. Last door on the left." The hallway behind the employees-only door smelled of cardboard and industrial cleaner. I knocked twice on the door marked Store Manager. "It's open," a voice called. Robert sat behind a metal desk cluttered with vendor catalogs and schedule printouts. He was taller than I expected when he stood to shake my hand, with salt and pepper hair cut short and practical. The creases around his eyes suggested he didn't sleep much. "David Harrison?" He glanced at my resume without sitting down. "Says here you're an accountant." I was. Firm downsized last month. He nodded once, not interested in the details. "Night shift stalkers start at $16 an hour. Shift runs 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 5 nights a week. You get your schedule 2 weeks out. We've had trouble keeping people in the position." The salary was significantly less than I'd made before, but my savings had dwindled to 3 figures. The rent was due in 8 days. "I'll take it," I said. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Don't you want to know what the job entails?" "I've worked retail before. Stock shelves, mop floors, help any late-night customers. I'm a fast learner." Something passed across his face. Relief, maybe. He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of forms. "Fill these out. I need 2 forms of ID. When can you start?" I checked my watch, a habit from when I had places to be. "Tonight, if you need me to." Robert nodded again, like I'd confirmed something. "Good. Janet will get you situated. She's the night supervisor." 30 minutes later, I'd signed all the paperwork and received a royal blue vest with the Megamart logo. Robert pointed me toward the break room where Janet Mitchell was drinking coffee from a thermos. She looked up when I entered. Mid-50s, with brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail and eyes that had seen too many late nights. The skin beneath them hung in tired pouches, but she straightened when she saw me. Something like relief crossing her features. "You must be David." She extended a hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. "Robert said you'd be starting tonight." "That's me." She gestured for me to sit. "Most people get at least a day's notice before their first shift. You sure you're up for jumping in?" "Rent's due soon," I said. Simple truth. Janet nodded like this made perfect sense. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a laminated card about the size of an index card. She slid it across the table. "These are our night shift protocols. Non-negotiable." I picked up the card. 5 rules were printed in neat handwriting. 1. If you hear a woman crying, ignore it. Do not investigate. 2. Do not acknowledge the man in the trench coat. If he waves, do not wave back. 3. If you see a little girl in a yellow dress, do not speak to her. 4. Do not let anyone in after closing, even other employees. 5. Always lock the door behind you when you leave. I read the list twice, waiting for the punchline. Janet watched me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Is this some kind of orientation joke?" I asked. "No." She tapped the card with one finger. "Keep this with you at all times. Memorize it." I slipped the card into my pocket, unsure how to respond. Janet stood and motioned for me to follow her. "I'll show you around, get you started on tonight's tasks. I usually leave around 11, so you'll be on your own after that." "Alone? In the whole store?" "We lock up at 10. The cleaning crew comes through right after closing, but they're usually done by 11:30. After that, it's just you until morning shift arrives at 6. She led me through the store, pointing out departments, explaining the inventory system, showing me where cleaning supplies were kept. The routine seemed normal enough. Stock shelves, face merchandise, clean up spills, basic maintenance. She handed me a walkie-talkie clipped to a belt charger. "Keep this on you. Channel 3 is security, Channel 5 is manager on call, but they're rarely needed." She paused. "Any questions?" I had several, all relating to the strange rule card, but something in her expression made me hesitate. "How many other people work nights?" I asked instead. "Just you, for now. We're between night staff at the moment." At 11, Janet handed me a ring of keys and a task list written on a clipboard. Her shift was ending, but she lingered at the front entrance, watching me through the glass doors as she walked to her car. She raised a hand in what might have been encouragement, then drove away. I consulted the task list. First up, restock electronics, then pet supplies, then hardware. Simple enough. I wheeled a cart of boxed headphones, phone chargers, and video games to the electronics department and started slotting them into their proper places. The store was eerily quiet without customers. The overhead music had shut off after closing, leaving only the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional ping of metal shelving as the building settled. My footsteps echoed no matter how quietly I walked. By 1 in the morning, I'd made good progress through electronics. I was unpacking a box of wireless earbuds when I heard it. A soft, muffled sound from somewhere near the grocery section. At first, I thought it might be a refrigerator unit making noise. But as I listened, the sound resolved into something unmistakable. A woman crying. The sound was distant but clear. Rhythmic sobs punctuated by gasping breaths. My first instinct was to investigate. Someone could be hurt or in trouble. I took 3 steps toward the sound before remembering the first rule on Janet's card. I stopped, one hand gripping the shelf beside me. The crying continued, rising slightly in volume. It sounded so real, so human. I pulled out the laminated card and read the first rule again. If you hear a woman crying, ignore it. Do not investigate. Goosebumps rippled across my arms. I forced myself to turn back to the electronics shelves. The sobbing continued, occasionally hitching as if the woman were trying to catch her breath. I opened another box of earbuds, focusing intently on arranging them in neat rows, trying to ignore how the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. For 20 minutes I worked like that, my movements mechanical while the crying ebbed and flowed from the grocery section. Sometimes it seemed to fade, only to return louder than before. Once I thought I heard a word mixed in with the sobs. Please. Or maybe help. But I kept my eyes on my task, unpacking, shelving, scanning. My hands shook slightly as I broke down the empty cardboard boxes. The crying made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't rationalize. I'd never considered myself superstitious, but something about that sound, in this empty store, with that specific rule in my pocket, it felt deeply wrong. I pushed my cart to the next section, deliberately moving away from the grocery aisles. The sobbing followed, not getting closer, but not fading either. I kept working, scanning inventory tags with trembling fingers, reminding myself that $16 an hour was better than nothing, that the rent was due, that I couldn't afford to walk out. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was making that sound wasn't human at all. The crying stopped as suddenly as it had begun. One moment the sobs echoed through the empty store. The next, silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton. I paused mid-scan, an HDMI cable hovering between shelf and hand. Waited for the sound to resume. Nothing. I finished the electronics section methodically, breaking down flattened cardboard and sorting it for recycling. The store's silence felt heavier now, as if the crying had been holding something else at bay. I checked the time on my phone. 2:17 in the morning. Not even halfway through the shift. The task list indicated hardware next. I wheeled my cart toward the back of the store, past sporting goods with its locked gun cases and fishing lures sealed in plastic. My footsteps tapped across the polished floor, too loud in the emptiness. Hardware occupied 6 aisles of precisely arranged tools, nails, screws, and home repair supplies. I scanned the manifest clipped to my cart. 24 cans of interior latex paint needed restocking. The colors matched a seasonal promotion I'd seen advertised at the front entrance. Sage green, warm beige, something called Coastal Sunrise. I found the paint in the stockroom, stacked on a metal trolley. Each gallon can weigh about 8 pounds. I loaded them onto my cart in groups of 4, making sure the weight balanced evenly. The wheels squeaked slightly on the turn back to the sales floor. The paint display stood near the end of aisle 12, organized by brand, then type, then color. I consulted the planogram, a printed diagram showing exactly where each product belonged. This wasn't complicated work, just repetitive. I settled into a rhythm. Check label, find location, place can, align front edge with others. The store's ventilation system hummed overhead. I'd restocked about half the paint when I felt a change in the air. Not temperature exactly, more like pressure. I straightened, stretching my lower back, and glanced toward the front of the store. A figure stood beyond the glass entrance doors, motionless beneath the parking lot lights. The fluorescence illuminated a man in a dark trench coat. Tall, thin, standing dead center in front of the entrance, far enough from the doors that the motion sensors wouldn't trigger. I couldn't make out his face clearly, just the silhouette of his shoulders and the odd stillness of his posture. Rule 2 flashed through my mind. Do not acknowledge the man in the trench coat. If he waves, do not wave back. I lowered my eyes to the paint can in my hands, reminded myself that the doors were locked, that I needed this job, that $16 an hour meant making rent. I continued stalking, keeping my movements deliberate and my back half turned to the entrance. The weight of the man's gaze pressed between my shoulder blades. I focused on the planogram, double-checking each can's placement. 20 minutes passed. I finished with the paint and moved to lighting fixtures 1 aisle over. From this position, I could no longer see the front doors unless I deliberately looked. I didn't. The lighting fixtures required assembly, matching glass shades to metal bases, securing them with small screws, then arranging them on the proper shelves. Precision work that demanded attention. My hands stayed steady even as my neck muscles tightened. When I finished the fixtures, I had no choice but to return to my cart at the end of the aisle, bringing the entrance back into view. The man remained in the same spot. As I watched peripherally, he raised one pale hand in a slow wave. I turned away immediately, pushing my cart toward plumbing supplies. The manifest listed toilet flappers and sink traps that needed restocking. I kept my head down, focusing on the list, the shelves, the inventory. Anything but the man outside. I checked my phone. 3:45. The night crawled. I'd always considered myself rational, pragmatic, but something about that motionless figure, combined with the laminated rules card and the woman's crying, hollowed out the space beneath my ribs. After restocking plumbing supplies, I allowed myself another glance toward the front. The space under the parking lot light stood empty. I scanned the lot through the windows, checking between the few parked cars, finding nothing. Relief loosened my shoulders even as a new wariness crept in. Where had he gone? The rest of the shift passed in relative calm. I finished the hardware section, mopped the floors and home goods, and reorganized the clearance end caps. Normal retail work. By 5:30, morning light had begun to seep around the edges of the building, turning the parking lot from black to gray. At 6 on the dot, the front door beeped as someone entered. Janet walked in, keys jingling at her hip. She stopped short when she saw me at the customer service counter where I'd been checking inventory reports. "You're still here," she said. Not a question. "That's the job, right?" I tried for casual, but my voice came out rougher than intended. Janet studied my face. "First nights can be rough. How'd it go?" I hesitated, weighing whether to mention what I'd heard and seen. But she'd given me the rules card. She knew. "There was crying," I said, "for maybe an hour, coming from grocery, and a man in a trench coat stood outside for a while." "Did you follow the rules?" "Yes." I ignored both. Something eased in Janet's expression, a subtle softening around her eyes. "Good. That's exactly right." She set her thermos on the counter. "And you're coming back Thursday?" Another paycheck versus whatever had happened in this store. My bank balance made the decision for me. "I'll be here," I said. "Bring the rules sheet. Always have it with you." She glanced at the clock. "You can clock out now. Get some sleep." I gathered my things from the break room, jacket, empty lunch container, car keys. As I pushed through the front doors, morning sunlight hit my face. The parking lot stood empty, except for Janet's sedan and my 10-year-old Civic. No sign of the man in the trench coat. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool morning air clear my head. Street sweepers worked the main roads. Early commuters clutched travel mugs at stoplights. Normal life resuming while night shift workers like me headed in the opposite direction. In my apartment, I double-checked the lock on my door before showering and falling into bed. Sleep came quickly, but my dreams were filled with echoing sobs and pale hands waving from a distance. I woke at 3 p.m, groggy and disoriented. While making coffee, I found myself researching local hardware stores. Something practical I could carry for protection seemed sensible. Just in case. I pulled into the Megamart parking lot at 9:45 on Thursday evening. The hammer I'd bought that afternoon rode in my jacket pocket, its wooden handle worn smooth by my grip during the drive over. Home Depot had a special on Stanley claw hammers. 12 ounces, good balance, nothing fancy, just substantial enough to make me feel less vulnerable. The store still had a few customers filling late-night grocery needs. Janet stood at the customer service desk, checking something on a computer. She glanced up when I approached, nodding in recognition. "You came back," she said, surprise evident in her tone. "Need the paycheck," I replied, keeping it simple. She logged out of her terminal. "Thursday nights tend to be more active, stay alert." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. "Stock and face paper goods tonight, then cleaning supplies, then seasonal. The cleaning crew's running late, so you'll need to mop the front end yourself." Janet handed me a printed task list and the keys. Our fingers brushed during the exchange. Her hands were cold. "Remember the rules?" she said, eyes fixing on mine. "All 5 of them, no exceptions." "Got it." She left at 10 after the last customer checked out. I watched her drive away, noting how she checked her mirrors twice before pulling onto the main road. The cleaning crew arrived 10 minutes later, 2 older men who barely acknowledged me as they vacuumed and emptied trash bins. They finished and left by 11:30. Then it was just me and 60,000 square feet of retail space. The paper goods section needed significant attention. Weekend sales had depleted the toilet paper and paper towels, leaving gaps like missing teeth along the shelves. I spent an hour bringing pallets from the stockroom, cutting open shrink-wrapped bundles, and arranging packages according to the planogram. The rustle of plastic wrap and thud of cardboard boxes provided welcome noise in the silent store. By midnight, I'd moved to the front end with a mop and bucket. The entryway collected dirt and moisture even in good weather, and the floors needed attention after a day of foot traffic. I worked methodically, starting from the customer service desk and moving outward in widening half circles. That's when I saw her. A small figure stood in the toy section, about 50 feet away. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress that caught the fluorescent light. Her brown hair hung in neat pigtails tied with matching yellow ribbons. She walked slowly between the aisles, trailing her fingers along boxes of dolls and action figures. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If you see a little girl in a yellow dress, do not speak to her. I kept mopping, angling my body away from the toy department. The wet mop head made squeaking sounds against the tile as I wrung it out and continued cleaning. I focused on the rhythm. Dip, ring, spread, repeat. The hammer in my pocket tapped against my thigh with each movement. When I next looked up, she stood at the end of the main aisle, watching me. Her head tilted slightly to one side, her expression curious. I returned to my mopping, moving farther along the front end. "Excuse me?" The voice was high and clear, exactly what you'd expect from a child her age. "Can you help me find my mommy?" I didn't answer, didn't look, just pushed the mop across the floor in long, even strokes. Footsteps approached. Light, quick patters on the clean tile. I moved to the next section, keeping my back to the sound. "Please, mister, I can't find my mommy anywhere." Her voice cracked slightly as if she might cry. She was here, and now she's gone. My hands tightened on the mop handle. Everything in me wanted to turn around, to help what sounded like a lost, frightened child. But the rules had been explicit, and after what I'd experienced on my first shift, I wasn't taking chances. I felt a tug on my sleeve. "Mister, please, I'm scared." I jerked my arm away and moved to the next section of floor, focusing on a sticky spot near the service desk. The little girl's footsteps followed. "Why won't you talk to me?" Now she sounded irritated rather than scared. "I can see you. I know you can hear me." I dunked the mop in the bucket, wrung it out, and continued cleaning. My neck muscles tightened as I felt her standing directly behind me. "That's not very nice," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "I just need help." Finally, she moved away. I heard her footsteps recede toward the toy section again. When I risked a glance over my shoulder, the main aisle stood empty. I finished mopping the front end and moved to cleaning supplies. The aisle smelled of artificial lemons and ammonia. I worked systematically, restocking dishwashing liquid, all-purpose cleaners, and disinfectant wipes. Halfway through, I caught a flash of yellow at the end of the aisle, the girl watching me from behind a display of laundry baskets. When she saw me notice her, she ducked away. This pattern continued for the next 2 hours. I'd work in an area and eventually spot her observing me from a distance. Sometimes she'd be perched on a lower shelf, sometimes peering around an end cap. Once, I found her sitting cross-legged in the middle of an aisle I needed to stock. I simply went to a different section and returned later to find her gone. By 3 in the morning, I'd completed most of my assigned tasks. The seasonal aisle needed attention. Valentine's displays were being replaced with early spring gardening items. I unboxed seed packets and arranged them on hanging racks, checked planters for damage, and positioned bags of potting soil on the lower shelves. A soft humming drifted to me from the next aisle. A child's voice, singing something I couldn't quite identify. The sound moved along the other side of the shelving, following my progress as I worked. I kept my eyes on the task, focusing on the seed packets in my hands rather than the voice just feet away. At 3:45, the humming stopped. The silence felt sudden, making me realize how accustomed I'd become to the sound. I finished the seasonal section and wheeled my empty cart toward the stockroom. The little girl stood at the end of the hardware aisle, directly in my path. Her yellow dress seemed to glow under the fluorescence. I turned the cart and went the long way around through sporting goods. When I reached the stockroom, I found her sitting on a stack of pallets, legs swinging. "You're not very fun," she said, watching me break down cardboard boxes. "The others usually talk to me." I kept working, keeping my eyes away from her face. "They always talk eventually," she continued, "especially when they get tired. Are you tired yet?" I wasn't, but the question itself made me aware of a heaviness creeping into my limbs. I checked my watch. 4:03. Almost 2 hours to go. She hopped down from the pallets. "I'll find you later," she said, skipping toward the stockroom door. "When you're more tired." I gathered cleaning supplies to wipe down the break room. When I turned around, she was gone. At 4:16, I heard a sharp, insistent knocking at the front entrance. The sound carried clearly through the empty store, startling me from wiping down the microwave. I set down my cleaning cloth and walked cautiously to the front. Janet stood outside the glass doors, her face tight with frustration. She gestured frantically when she saw me, pointing to her hip where her keys would normally hang. She mouthed something I couldn't make out and knocked again, harder this time. I approached the doors slowly. Janet wore the same clothes she'd had on earlier. Blue Megamart vest over a gray shirt, black pants. Her hair was still pulled back in its practical ponytail. She looked exactly like herself, down to the permanent tiredness around her eyes. She pressed her palm against the glass and spoke loudly enough for me to hear through the door. "I forgot my damn keys in the break room. Let me in." Rule 4. Do not let anyone in after closing, even other employees. I stopped several feet from the door. "Janet?" Who else would it be? Come on, it's freezing out here. It was cold. I could see her breath fogging the glass. She hugged herself, stamping her feet against the concrete. "I can't let you in," I said. "It's against the rules." Her expression shifted from frustration to disbelief. "The rules are for your protection, not mine. I've worked here 3 years. Let me in." I hesitated. It certainly looked like Janet, sounded like Janet. Why would there be a rule against letting actual employees back in? Maybe she had forgotten her keys. Maybe this rule, like the others, was designed for different circumstances. "David," she said, her voice softening. "Please, I just need to grab my keys and I'll leave you alone. You've got to be reasonable here." My hand moved toward the lock, then stopped. "Can't you call Robert or someone else with keys?" "At 4 in the morning? Come on." She knocked again, more insistently. "This is ridiculous. I'm your supervisor. Open the door." The rational part of me said this was simple. Help my boss, who was locked out. But something felt wrong. The timing, the insistence, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder at the empty parking lot. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back from the door. "I can bring your keys out to you if you tell me where they are." Her expression changed, something quick and ugly flickering across her features. "That's not good enough. I need to come in. Open the door, David. Now." I backed away another step. "No." She slammed her palm against the glass. "Open this door." The words emerged as a snarl, her face contorting with sudden rage. "Let me in." My hand found the hammer in my pocket. I gripped the wooden handle, keeping it concealed but ready. Janet's rage vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her expression smoothed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. I'm just cold and frustrated. Please, David, I really need those keys." I remained silent, watching her. Something was happening to her face. Subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable. The skin around her eyes seemed to loosen, then tighten. Her cheekbones shifted slightly higher, then lower again. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing my stare. "Do I have something on my face?" She reached up to touch her cheek, and her fingers sank slightly into the flesh, as if pressing into soft clay. My throat closed. I took another step back. Janet's features continued to shift, her nose narrowing, then widening, her lips thinning, then plumping again. The movements were small but constant now, her face unable to settle into one configuration. "Let me in," she said, but her voice had changed too, deeper, with an odd resonance that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. "Let me in now." I pulled the hammer from my pocket and held it where she could see it. "Stay out there." She pressed both hands against the glass. Her fingers had grown longer, the joints more pronounced. Her face continued its nauseating shifts, features sliding across her skull like wax melting in the sun. "I'm going to call the police," I said, backing away from the door. The thing wearing Janet's dissolving face smiled, revealing teeth that had become too numerous, too sharp. "They won't see me," it said in that multiple voice. "Only you will. Open the door, David. I'm so cold out here." I turned and walked quickly toward the back office where the phone was kept. Behind me, the knocking intensified, becoming a rhythmic pounding that echoed through the store. I didn't look back. In the office, I called security and reported someone trying to break in at the front entrance. The bored-sounding guard promised to drive by within 15 minutes. I hung up and sat at the desk, hammer still clutched in my hand, listening to the distant pounding. After what seemed like hours, but was only minutes according to the wall clock, the pounding stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before cautiously returning to the front. The entrance stood empty. No sign of Janet, or whatever had been wearing her face. Just the empty parking lot under the yellow security lights. And beyond that, darkness. I checked and rechecked the locks, then retreated to the break room. My hands shook as I made coffee. I didn't want just to have something to do. The hammer stayed in my grip or within reach for the rest of the shift. At 5:58, I heard the electronic beep of the front door unlocking. A security guard stepped in, followed a minute later by Janet. She looked normal. Completely. Utterly normal. No shifting features. No elongated fingers. Just the same tired, middle-aged woman who'd left me 7 hours earlier. "Security said there was a problem?" she asked, approaching the customer service desk where I stood. I studied her face, looking for any sign of irregularity. Found none. "Someone was trying to get in around 4. Looked like you, but wasn't me," she finished. Her expression remained calm, unsurprised. "What did you do?" "Followed the rules. Didn't open the door." Janet nodded once, approval evident in the gesture. "Good. That's why you're still here." She glanced at the hammer in my hand but didn't comment on it. "Anything else happen?" I hesitated. Girl in a yellow dress, wandering around the store, asking for help finding her mother. And I ignored her, like the rules said. Janet's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You're doing well, David. Better than most." She checked her watch. "You can clock out now. Get some rest." As I gathered my things, Janet added, "I'm impressed you came back after your first night. Even more impressed you'll probably be back after this one." It wasn't a question, but there was a question in it. "Will it get worse?" I asked. She considered this, then answered simply, "Yes." I nodded, accepting this. My bank account didn't leave room for other options. "I'll see you next week." "Tuesday at 10, she confirmed. "Bring the hammer, and maybe something with a longer reach." In my car, I sat for several minutes before starting the engine. The sky had lightened to pre-dawn gray. A few early birds were pulling into the parking lot, morning shift arriving, customers coming for coffee and breakfast items. Normal people with normal schedules who saw Megamart as just another big box store. I wondered what they'd think if they knew what happened after the doors locked at night. Wondered if they'd believe me. I barely believed it myself, and I'd seen it with my own eyes. The hammer rode in my passenger seat all the way home. I brought it inside with me and placed it on my nightstand before falling into an exhausted sleep. In my dreams, a little girl in a yellow dress sat at the foot of my bed, humming softly and watching me with patient, ancient eyes. The glass splintered. A spiderweb of cracks spread from where the thing wearing Janet's face had slammed its fist against the door. One more hit and the safety glass would give. The creature pulled back its arm for another strike, its wrist bending at an impossible angle. I backed up 3 steps, gripping the hammer. My throat had gone dry. The creature hit the glass again, and this time a chunk the size of my palm fell inward, landing on the tile with a musical tinkle. Cold air rushed through the hole. The creature shoved its arm through the opening. Its flesh stretched and flowed like melted wax, thinning to squeeze through the jagged gap. The fingers extended into something like claws, elongating until they nearly reached me. Rule 4. Do not let anyone in after closing. I'd kept the door locked, but that wouldn't matter if it broke its way in. The arm retracted, and the thing pulled back. For a moment, I thought it might leave. Instead, it rammed its shoulder against the weakened glass. The remaining panel buckled, then shattered. The creature stepped through the empty frame, glass crunching beneath its feet. Janet's face had almost completely dissolved now, features sliding across a surface that seemed more liquid than solid. Only the eyes remained recognizable, and they fixed on me with absolute hunger. Thank you for letting me in, it said in that multi-layered voice. The mouth split into a grin that extended past where ears should be. I swung the hammer without thinking. The motion came from somewhere deeper than conscious decision, pure survival reflex. The steel head connected with its temple with a sound like a watermelon hitting concrete. Wet, heavy, final. The creature staggered sideways, its head indented where I'd struck, like clay that refused to spring back to shape. A black substance oozed from the depression, not blood. Something thicker and oilier that caught the fluorescent light in prismatic patterns. It straightened and lurched toward me. I backed up, keeping the service counter between us. The thing moved wrong, jerky, like a video missing frames. Each step covered more distance than it should have. I feinted left, then broke right, putting a cardboard Valentine's display between us. The creature swiped at it, sending boxes of chocolate and stuffed bears flying. I swung the hammer again, catching it in the chest. The hammer sank 3 inches into its torso and stuck there. I yanked it free as the creature howled, a sound like metal grinding against metal that made my teeth hurt. The black substance fountained from the wound, spattering across the white tile floor. The creature dropped to its knees. Its face, what remained of it, twisted in what might have been surprise. It reached toward me, fingers stretching impossibly long, and I brought the hammer down on its skull. This time I felt bone give way beneath the steel head. The thing collapsed. Its body seemed to deflate, sinking in on itself. The flesh, if that's what it was, liquefied, running across the floor in rivulets of black. Within 30 seconds, what had been a 6-foot humanoid became a puddle 3 feet wide. I stood over it, hammer raised for another strike. My breathing came in short, shallow gasps. The puddle continued to shrink, the edges drawing inward until it was the size of a dinner plate. Then it simply evaporated, leaving nothing but a faint, smoky residue that itself vanished seconds later. Not even a stain remained on the white tile. You did good. I whirled around, hammer still raised. The little girl in the yellow dress stood 10 feet away, observing with calm interest. She looked the same, pigtails, yellow ribbons, neatly pressed dress. But something had changed in her eyes. They looked older now, ancient. "They'll try to take your face next time," she said. Her voice had lost its childish lilt. She spoke with the measured cadence of someone much older. My arms trembled from adrenaline and exertion. "What was that thing?" The girl tilted her head slightly. "You ask questions. The others just scream." She took a step closer and I tightened my grip on the hammer. "It doesn't have a name you could pronounce, but it wants to be you. All of them do." "All of them?" My voice cracked. "The crying woman, the man outside, others you haven't met yet." She glanced at the empty spot where the creature had been. "They're hungry for what you have." "Which is what?" Her smile revealed small, even teeth, perfect for a child her age. Too perfect. "Substance," she said. "You're real in ways they aren't anymore." She took another step closer. I could explain more, but you've broken a rule, haven't you? Talking to me? I swallowed. You're not going to dissolve me? The smile widened. Not tonight. She walked backward, her eyes never leaving mine. Good luck with the police. They won't believe you. Police? But she had already vanished. One moment she stood in the aisle, the next she was simply gone. No dramatic fade, no puff of smoke. Just there, then not. I realized I'd been clutching the hammer so tightly that my fingers had cramped. I forced them open, massaging my palm. The handle was slick with sweat. The broken glass. I needed to deal with the broken glass. I found a push broom and dustpan in the janitorial closet and swept up the shards, piling them into a cardboard box. The entire front entrance panel was gone. Cold air flowed freely into the store. Anyone could walk in. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. 911, what's your emergency? I need police at the Mega Mart on County Line Road. My voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. Someone broke in, attacked me. Are you injured, sir? I looked down at myself. My clothes were intact, no cuts or bruises that I could see. No, I'm okay. Is the intruder still in the building? I glanced at the empty floor where the puddle had been. No, they're gone. Officers are on their way. Please stay on the line until they arrive. I stood by the broken entrance, hammer still in hand, phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher asked questions. Description of the attacker, what had been taken, how they had gained entry. I answered mechanically, unable to tell the truth but unwilling to lie outright. I described a tall person in dark clothing, said they'd broken the glass, claimed they'd run off after I'd defended myself. 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot 7 minutes after my call, light bars flashing but sirens silent. 4 officers approached cautiously, flashlights sweeping across the storefront. I set the hammer down and raised my hands as they entered through the broken doorway. I'm the Night Stalker, I said. I made the call. The officers checked the immediate area, then holstered their weapons. One, a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache, took my statement while his partner photographed the broken glass and entry point. You said you hit the intruder? The officer, McCready according to his nameplate, looked skeptical. With a hammer? Yes. Hard enough to stop them? Yes. But there's no blood, no tissue, nothing. I nodded. They ran away after I hit them. McCready exchanged a look with his partner. After taking what sounds like a potentially fatal blow to the head? I don't know how badly they were hurt. It happened fast. The partial truth felt thick in my mouth. The officers searched the store. Found nothing. No blood trail, no footprints besides mine, no evidence anyone else had been there except for the broken glass. They called for detectives who arrived 30 minutes later. By then, 2 more patrol cars had shown up, along with a supervisor. I repeated my story for the detectives. A man in dark clothing, broken glass, the hammer. Each telling required more invention to fill the gaps between what had actually happened and what I could plausibly claim. The detectives took notes, their expressions growing increasingly doubtful. Mr. Harrison, the lead detective finally said, your statement contains several inconsistencies. He was tall and thin with the permanent tan of someone who golfed on his days off. The evidence doesn't match your description of events. What do you mean? There's no blood anywhere, despite you claiming you struck the intruder in the head hard enough to make them flee. The surveillance cameras show no one entering or leaving the store except you. My stomach dropped. Cameras? External security cameras. He gestured toward the parking lot. They show you arriving at 9:45. No one else approaches the doors until our officers at 3:17 this morning. That's impossible. I fought to keep my voice steady. Someone broke that glass. You can see it. Yes, the glass is broken. His tone suggested this was the only fact he was willing to concede. from the inside. My hands started trembling again. You think I broke it? He didn't answer directly. Have you been under unusual stress lately, Mr. Harrison? Financial troubles, perhaps? Relationship issues? The question caught me off guard. What? No. I mean, yes, I need this job, but when was the last time you slept properly? Yesterday afternoon. The answer sounded weak even to me. Look, I know what happened. Someone broke in. They tried to attack me. I defended myself. The detective made a note. Without leaving any evidence apart from broken glass that appears to have been broken from the inside. He closed his notebook. We'll file a report, but I'm not sure what corporate will make of this. Fatigue crashed over me as the adrenaline drained away. I sank into a chair at the customer service desk. The detective watched me with the careful assessment of someone evaluating a potentially unstable person. Would you like us to call someone for you, or perhaps have paramedics check you out? I'm fine, I said, automatically. Just tired. The officers and detectives conferred near the broken entrance. I caught fragments. Possible mental health issue, sleep deprivation, workplace incident report. They glanced at me periodically, their expressions a mixture of concern and wariness. By 6:30, only one patrol car remained. The store would open to customers at 7. I had no idea how to explain the broken entrance to the morning staff. At 6:45, Janet's sedan pulled into the parking lot. The real Janet, or at least I hoped it was the real Janet. She spoke briefly with the remaining officer before coming inside. She surveyed the broken glass, then me, her expression revealing nothing. Rough night? The officer hovered nearby, clearly waiting to see how I'd respond. I chose my words carefully. Someone broke in. I had to defend myself. Janet nodded as if this were a completely normal situation. The cameras catch anything? Nothing useful, the officer said. Your employee claims someone broke in, but we can't find evidence to support that. I see. Janet pulled out her phone and tapped at the screen. Well, I've called our emergency glass service. They'll be here in 30 minutes to secure the entrance before opening. She turned to the officer. Will that work for you? We're about wrapped up here. He glanced at me. Mr. Harrison might want to take a day or two off, get some rest. I'll make sure he's taken care of, Janet assured him. The officer left, and Janet waited until his patrol car pulled away before speaking again. Break room, now. I followed her to the employee break room at the back of the store. She closed the door and gestured for me to sit. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted beyond words. Janet made coffee in silence, pouring 2 cups and setting one in front of me. She remained standing, leaning against the counter. Tell me exactly what happened, she said. Everything. I did. The creature with her face, the hammer, the black puddle, the little girl's warning. I expected disbelief, or at least skepticism. Instead, Janet listened with grim recognition. When I finished, she set her coffee down and rolled up her sleeve. A thick scar ran from her wrist to her elbow, puckered tissue in a jagged line. 2 years ago, she said, something that looked like Robert broke through the garden center emergency exit. I had a box cutter. She rolled her sleeve back down. They don't leave blood or bodies, just residue, and that evaporates. My hands shook as I lifted the coffee cup. The police think I'm having some kind of breakdown. They always do. Janet took the seat across from me. No one believes it unless they've seen it themselves. And most who see don't survive to tell anyone. What are these things? The girl said they want to take our faces. Janet's expression hardened. I don't know what they are. No one does. Corporate denies anything happens here at night. Says it's just employee stress and imagination. She looked at the clock. Morning shift arrives in 10 minutes. We need to deal with the door. Janet. I set my cup down. These things tried to kill me. Yes. And it's happened before. Yes. And will happen again. She met my eyes directly. Yes, if you keep working here, it will. Why would anyone stay? Why do you stay? Janet stood and walked to her locker. She pulled out a pay stub and handed it to me. The amount was more than double what she'd initially told me the position paid. Hazard pay, she said. They don't call it that, but that's what it is. After your first month, if you're still alive, you get a significant raise and full benefits. I stared at the number on the pay stub. It was more money than I'd made in my previous job. There's a staff meeting at 4 this afternoon, Janet continued. We need to discuss your position, whether you're staying or going. She took back the pay stub. No one would blame you if you quit. Most do. The sound of cars pulling into the parking lot filtered through the store, morning employees arriving. Janet checked her watch. Think about it today. Let me know at the meeting. She headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you did better than most. Surviving a direct confrontation is rare. She left me sitting alone in the break room. I finished my coffee slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. The hammer sat on the table beside me, ordinary hardware store steel on wood, now the only thing standing between me and whatever prowled the store at night. I should quit. Anyone rational would quit. But rent was due in 5 days, my bank account was nearly empty, and no other jobs had called me back. I tucked the hammer into my jacket pocket and walked out through the garden center. Morning sunlight struck my face, warm and reassuring. Normal people were starting their normal days, unaware of what existed in the darkness of Megamart after closing. As I drove home, the little girl's words echoed in my mind. They'll try to take your face next time. Next time. Not if, but when. I set my alarm for 3 in the afternoon and fell into bed fully clothed, the hammer on the nightstand beside me. The staff meeting took place in a windowless room behind the store offices. 4 folding tables arranged in a square with 8 metal chairs. By 10, after 4, only 3 of us had shown up, Janet, Robert, and me. The room smelled like burnt coffee and stale donuts from a pink box left open on a side counter. Robert entered last, carrying a manila folder with my name written on the tab. His tie sat crooked against his collar, and a coffee stain marked his cuff. He set the folder down and pushed it across the table without opening it. 3 nights in, and you've already broken a window, he said, no greeting beforehand. He didn't sound angry, just tired. Corporate's not pleased about the expense. Something broke it, I corrected, keeping my voice steady. Trying to get in. Robert exchanged a look with Janet. The police report says otherwise. The police weren't there. No, Janet cut in. But they file reports, and those reports go to insurance, and insurance talks to corporate. She tapped her fingernails against a printed sheet. The glass company charged us $870 for an emergency weekend replacement. I shifted in my chair. The hammer pressed against my thigh through my jacket pocket. I didn't break that glass. Robert leaned back, studying me with bloodshot eyes. I've hired 27 night stalkers in the past 14 months. Only 2 have lasted past their first month. One of those 2 quit after 6 weeks. The other, he gestured at Janet, is sitting right here. Janet nodded, acknowledging this with a slight tightening around her eyes. 27, I repeated. The night shift has a turnover rate of nearly 100% within the first month. Robert continued. Most people quit after their first encounter. Others simply don't show up again. I looked at Janet. 3 years, you said? 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, she answered, precision in her voice. I've seen things that don't make sense. Things I can't explain. She pulled a sheet from her folder and slid it over. A pay stub with her name and a figure nearly double what she'd told me when I was hired. The official job listing says $16 an hour, Robert said. But after the first month, if you're still here, it increases to 29 plus full benefits. Corporate knows about the problems. They just don't acknowledge them officially. Why keep the store open at night? I asked. Why not just close it? Robert shrugged, a gesture that revealed deep exhaustion. Management claims the incidents are isolated. Besides, daytime staff report nothing unusual and security footage never captures anything. He tapped the folder with my name. All I know is I need people willing to work nights, and those people are increasingly hard to find. Or keep alive, Janet added quietly. Robert shot her a look, then turned back to me. The position is yours permanently if you want it. Full benefits after 30 days. Dental, medical, vision. 4 weeks paid vacation after the first year. The offer hung in the air between us. I did the math in my head. $29 an hour, 40 hours a week. Almost $5,000 a month before taxes. More than enough to cover rent, car payments, and still build savings. The encounters will continue, Janet said, studying my face. Probably get worse. But following the rules keeps you alive. She touched her forearm where I knew the scar ran beneath her sleeve. Mostly. I need to think about it, I said. Robert nodded and stood. Let me know by morning. I've got other interviews scheduled tomorrow if needed. He gathered his papers, leaving my folder on the table. For what it's worth, you've handled things better than most. After he left, Janet poured coffee from a thermal carafe. The liquid came out thick and smelled overbrewed. She added 3 packets of sugar to hers before sliding a cup toward me. How's your hand? She asked, nodding toward my right hand. I flexed my fingers. The muscles felt sore from gripping the hammer, but no visible damage remained. Fine. I have Advil in my locker if you need it. I'm okay. Janet stirred her coffee with a plastic straw. You already know what decision you're making, don't you? My bank account had $87 in it. Rent, $1,100, was due in 4 days. No other jobs had called me back. I'd spent all morning weighing my options while staring at the ceiling above my bed, the hammer resting on my chest. Yes, I admitted. She nodded once. I figured. You've got that look. What look? The trapped look. The one that says you need this job more than you fear what happens in this store. She took a sip of her coffee. I had it too when I started. Single mom, 2 kids in college. Underwater mortgage. I hadn't known Janet had children. I realized how little I knew about her beyond her role in the store. How do you do it? I asked. Night after night, knowing what's out there? She set her cup down. Routine, rules, boundaries. She reached into her bag and pulled out a laminated card, a new copy of the rules, printed on better paper. The rules work, not always perfectly, but they're the best protection we have. I took the card. The rules were identical to the previous version. 1. Ignore any woman crying. Do not investigate. 2. Do not acknowledge the man in the trench coat. If he waves, do not wave back. 3. If you see a little girl in a yellow dress, do not speak to her. 4. Do not let anyone in after closing, even other employees. 5. Always lock the door when leaving. If you're staying, Janet said, you'll need better equipment. She pointed to the hammer's outline in my jacket. That was good thinking, but you'll want something with reach and a better light. The flashlights in the stockroom are garbage. I'll pick something up. 3 nights a week to start, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10 to 6. She slid a printed schedule across the table. You'll always have 1 weekday on your own. When the next person lasts more than 2 weeks, we'll add them to rotation. If they last, I said. Janet's expression didn't change. If. I tucked the schedule and rule card into my pocket and stood. I'll see you tonight then. 10 sharp, she confirmed. And David? I turned back at the door. The girl in the yellow dress. You said she spoke to you. Yes. And you spoke back. I nodded. Janet's eyes narrowed slightly. Be careful with her. She's different from the others. I don't know what she wants. She said they're trying to take our faces, that we're real in ways they aren't anymore. Janet absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Interesting, she finally said. But that doesn't mean she's on our side. I left the meeting with a job I didn't want but desperately needed. On the drive home, I stopped at Home Depot and bought a crowbar, 24 inches of solid steel with a curved pry end, heavier than the hammer, with better reach. I also picked up a high-intensity tactical flashlight, 300 lumens with a strobe setting and aircraft-grade aluminum casing that doubled as an impact weapon. At home, I set my alarm for 8:30 and stretched out on my couch, not bothering to undress. The crowbar rested beside me, its weight reassuring against my thigh. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my neighbor's television through the thin walls, replaying Janet's words about the girl in the yellow dress, different from the others, not necessarily on our side. Sleep came in brief, unsatisfying intervals. Each time I drifted off, I jerked awake thinking I'd heard crying or knocking. By 9:15, I gave up and showered, letting hot water beat against my shoulders until the tank ran lukewarm. I arrived at Megamart at 9:48. The parking lot still held a dozen customer vehicles. Inside, a night manager I hadn't met before was counting down a register, while a young cashier bagged a late shopper's groceries. Janet stood near the service desk, checking something on a clipboard. "Earlier than necessary," she commented when I approached. She eyed the crowbar, partially visible beneath my jacket. "Good choice." The last customers left at 9:55. Janet locked the doors behind them, checking each lock twice. She handed me the keys and the night's task list. "Electronics inventory tonight, then seasonal. We're rotating Easter merchandise to the front. After that, grocery needs facing." She zipped her jacket. "You know the rules, follow them." "I will." She paused at the door. "We all have our reasons for being here, David. Financial pressure, family obligations, whatever. But there comes a point where no amount of money is worth what happens in this place after dark. When you reach that point, don't hesitate, just walk away." "Have you reached that point?" I asked. Janet's mouth tightened. "Not yet, but I'm getting closer." She pushed the door open. "Good luck tonight." The electronic lock engaged behind her with a definitive click. I watched her walk to her car, start the engine, and drive away. The taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving only the empty parking lot illuminated by yellow security lamps. I stood in the vast, silent store, listening to the hum of refrigeration units and the soft tick of the wall clock behind the service desk. My crowbar hung from my right hand, its weight comforting against my palm. The flashlight rested in my left jacket pocket, the hammer in my right. A sensation of being watched prickled the back of my neck. I turned slowly, scanning the long aisles stretching into the dimness of the store's depths. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound beyond the building's normal mechanical noises, but something was there. I could feel it. I unfolded the task list and checked the first item. Electronics inventory. Serial numbers for all items over $100. A tedious task requiring attention to detail. I gathered a clipboard and inventory sheets from the office and headed toward the electronics department, crowbar in hand. The work would keep me occupied, keep me focused, perhaps even keep me alive until morning came with its reassuring light and normal customers and the mundane safety of the daytime world. Until then, I had rules to follow and inventory to count in a store that was never truly empty after dark.